When he straightened up, it was clear he'd failed. The rough, tough Florida linebacker was crying, weeping not only for the SEC championship the Gators had won, but for the 50 others they hadn't. Fittingly, it didn't come easy. To have waited 50 years and then won easily wouldn't have purged Gator souls the way Saturday's victory did. Now, what the hell is going on here? These people are kids. They're 19, 20 years old. They've only been playing football at the university an average of 2 years. The people in the stands haven't gone to every game for 50 years and cried over the losses. What's happening here? This was a cultural transmission of the values of the football team to all of the fans, all of the commentators, all of the players in a very short period of time. Anyone involved with that university, probably in a matter of months, was fully indoctrinated with the history of the University of Florida's football team. They incorporated and assimilated all of that information to a gut emotional feeling that spilled out as if they had personally lost every one of those championships until that year. Now, I think in the same way, transmissions of all kinds of cultural values take place over the years, over the decades, and even over the centuries. How could we have had the 1930s if we hadn't had the exuberance of the 1920s? How could we have had the rebuilding of the 1950s if we hadn't gone through World War II? And certainly, how could we have had the ebullient, crazy 1960s if for a decade or more people hadn't built very conservatively and very powerfully, year after year, a reserve big enough to begin throwing a nice party? How could we have had the 1970s, the reactionary 70s, if we hadn't overdone it in the 60s? And how could we have experienced the bootstrap psychology of the 1980s? Let's get ourselves back in shape, everywhere from government to personal jogging, if we hadn't gone through the 70s, which most people considered a negative psychological period. I say we couldn't have, that each change is born from the preceding conditions and is ready to generate the next change. The market acts the same way. Now, just as valid, I think, is the question, okay, maybe I'm convinced that this kind of thing could happen over the long term, but you're also telling me that on the short term, you're seeing the same structures. That if I'm looking at a 3-year bull market that takes a 5-wave shape, the intermediate term advance of wave 1 is taking a 5-wave shape, and wave 1 of that took a 5-wave shape, and wave 1 of that, and so forth, all the way down to things I can barely measure. Well, my answer to that is, so far there has been absolutely no evidence to indicate otherwise. Does mass psychology really operate at the level to create 5 up and 3 down, or 5 down and 3 up in a correction on, say, a matter of a few hours? The answer is yes. We've been watching quote machines now for several years which give you tick-by-tick data. You can make 5-minute bars, 15-minute bars, and 30-minute bars, and sure enough, the Elliott wave pattern continues to show up. Here's an example of one. This is a chart from September 1987, actually August 1987, of the major market index of stocks, referred to as the MAXI. It so happens that there's a story to this. This was utilized in real time to make some money. When this came up on the chart, someone said, have you noticed this very pretty 5-wave upward structure that we've just created over the last couple of hours? What should we do? Well, we want to buy something because this 5-wave structure is indicating the larger trend is up. We've been in a larger correction prior to that. Where would you place an order to buy a futures contract on the MAXI? Somewhere in the area of the previous 4th wave, right? And of course, this is the lower boundary, which means, according to the guideline, it would be very rare for prices to go under that level if indeed a new impulsive wave structure was unfolding. So they put their order in to buy at the lower end of the 4th wave because they wanted to keep risk low. If they didn't get it, that's fine. If they got it, they had their stop in right there. just below the low point of wave 4. And here is the way prices ended the day. The order was filled right here at the low on a spike, which undoubtedly was a lot of stops being taken out at the last minute. No stop was taken out because it didn't go below the 4th wave, and stocks immediately turned around and went to a new high for the day. So you don't have to look at a 50-year chart and wait a decade or so for your forecast to work out. You can apply exactly the same rules and exactly the same guidelines to any degree of development of prices. One of the best ways to learn the wave principle is to watch the development of these structures on the very short term, because you'll learn a lot of lessons in a short period of time. You'll see a lot of 5-wave structures develop, a lot of corrective waves develop, a lot of pullbacks to the previous 4th wave, a lot of times when 5 is about the same length as 1, or if not, it'll be a Fibonacci relationship, and on and on. You'll see alternation occurring very often. When we come back, we're going to apply the rules and guidelines we've just explored, and we're going to take a big step forward. We're not going to just talk about counting to 5. We're actually going to do it. Thank you.